Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is City Talk. The pachyderms have invaded the city, so have the protesters. On Sunday, we heard from hundreds of thousands of charged but quite civil protesters. Grant Park 1968 didn't happen in 2004. They behaved, and so did the police. Monday was New York, 9/11, Terror Day, starring Bernie Kerry, John McCain, and St. Rudy. Tuesday, it was Laura Bush and the Terminator. Here to talk about the Republican convention, the mayor's tightrope routine, and the upcoming presidential election is the Speaker of the City Council, Gifford Miller. Welcome, Mr. Speaker.
Thanks, Doug.
The mayor, he's walking a tightrope. Has he successfully navigated his problems? What are his problems, number one?
Well, I guess what you're referring to is, as a problem, is the fact that he is supporting a presidential candidate who is working against the interests of New Yorkers. He supports a governor who does not represent the interests of New Yorkers. He represents a party whose views are out of step with the needs and concerns of ordinary New Yorkers. And so I guess that's his problem. It's a problem common to all Republicans. Unfortunately, the agenda that Mayor Bloomberg is supporting is not in New York's best interests. And so I suppose the problem that you're referring to is his concern about how to not make that as clear to people as it probably should be.
Now, he both has to, it seems to me, embrace the party, the Republican Party, and the party, the festivities at Madison Square Garden, but at the same time he can't embrace their principles and their major actors. For example, I was at the Log Cabin Republican reception on Sunday, and he clearly was uncomfortable as a Republican and was much more comfortable talking to that particular group. Governor Pataki came in and was different. While Bloomberg didn't mention Bush at all, Pataki didn't mention the word gay at all. So you've got these two Republicans who
you got a lot of people in denial.
Right. It seems so. Can this be successfully done? Can the mayor be a Republican on one hand and really not be a Republican in the other? How does that define the mayor?
I don't know whether it can be done, but it's not being done. I mean, look, unlike other Republicans, even Rudy Giuliani, who on occasion would endorse Mario Cuomo for election, would endorse the President Clinton's crime plan against other Republicans. Mike Bloomberg has been an absolutely orthodox Republican. He has supported all of the orthodox Republican candidates. He has given $800,000 to various candidates across the country. He's attended fundraisers with Karl Rove he attended one fundraiser for a Senate candidate who described abortion clinic workers as doctors of death. He is an orthodox candidate. He has supported the president, supported the governor, supported their agendas. And what I find particularly concerning about it is that we get nothing for it as a city. We've gotten terrible treatment from Washington, terrible treatment from the Bush administration, horrible treatment from the Pataki administration, and for all of the mayor's, enormously generous support for all these candidates, we get nothing for it.
You've been a critic of the mayor's strategies as the mayor of the city of New York in terms of getting what we need and deserve from both the federal and state governments. I want to turn to the mayor's speech on Monday. Quote, I want to thank President Bush for supporting New York City in changing the Homeland Security funding formula and for leading the global war on terrorism. The president deserves our support. We are here to support him. I am here to support him. First of all, he thanks the president, and it was really, I think, the strongest statement I've heard from the mayor in terms of his relationship to the president. But I want to go on. Let me just read the next sentence. We must all recognize that Homeland Security funds should be allocated by threat and no other reason. I will repeat this message to my fellow Republicans, Democrats, and independents as many times as it takes so we can keep New York safe and secure. And I was watching this, and there were people milling around. Nobody was paying attention. There was this buzz. But when he said this about it should be allocated by threat and no other reason, it sort of died. There was no response there. Is not the message getting through to the Republican Party?
Well, I think the mayor really lost a historic opportunity, and that was an opportunity with the entire Republican leadership of our country to stand up and fight for New York. He had every delegate from every state across the country, and he had a chance to tell the truth. And the truth is that there's nothing to thank President Bush for. President Bush hasn't done anything to help New York City. In fact, we spend $900 million a year on anti-terrorism activities. We get less than $100 million. The president recently changed the threat assessment formula from 7 cities to 50. What happened? New York lost almost $100 million. The truth is that we send now $11.5 billion more to Washington than we get back. When Mike Bloomberg took office, it was about $6.5. So the truth is that we get the short end of the stick, that we are subsidizing the rest of the country, and that Mike Bloomberg had an opportunity with the best audience that you could possibly imagine to at least make that point. He didn't have to do it in a disrespectful way. He could have done it in an honest way. And instead what he did was thank the president for things that the president doesn't deserve to be thanked for, announce that he's supporting a candidate who is clearly not in the best interest of the people of the city of New York. At least the New York residents understand that in overwhelming numbers. And you know, I think it was a tremendously lost opportunity.
Okay, but let's put I'm putting myself in the mayor's position.
Right.
And I'm the host.
Right.
This is sort of is this a slap in the face of the congregated here? I mean, how realistic is it that the mayor would, in a sense, go off on the party and the president? I mean, could he have gone much further than this?
I don't think he had to be disrespectful. I think he could have gotten up there and told what the truth was. He could have said, we're sending $11.5 billion more than we're getting back. He could have said, we're getting the shortest amount of Medicaid matching funding of any jurisdiction. That you're here, we're glad you're here, and we need your help. And here's why we need your help. But instead of saying that, what he said was, thank you. You're great. God bless you. Everything's fine. You're doing a terrific job. Keep up the good work. And reality is there is no good work there. If they needed I happen to think that the Republican Party needs a little bit of a wake-up call. I don't know about a slap in the face, but a wake-up call. But he could have done it in a respectful way and been true to the people that he represents, and he didn't.
Okay. Let's look at the protest and the protesters, and the anticipation of this was it was going to be Grant Park 68. A lot of us felt that it was way overhyped. In fact, on Sunday, you had several 100,000 people who were really civil, and the cops were civil in return. I think both Leslie Kagan, head of United for Peace and Justice, and the commissioner were extraordinarily responsible in this. I personally thought that lawn care should not trump the First Amendment, but ultimately it appeared that it worked.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think it would have been a bigger protest and a more effective protest, and clearly if it had not been bounced around to 27 different places, if the mayor had said that, if we can do it for the Dave Matthews Band, we can do it for people who don't agree with the people we're rolling out the red carpet for at Madison Square Garden. I don't understand how it is that you think that you get just to invite Republicans to town for the Republican convention. Everybody understands you have to invite other people who have different points of view. In fact, points of view that are better represent the needs of New Yorkers. But so I really think it was a big mistake not to have the protest in Central Park. But I think we're a very different country than we were in 1968, and there's a very different understanding of what's the right way of protesting. And I also think that people understood that this was a group of New Yorkers and Americans from all over the country who are really upset and angry and motivated by the horrendous record of the Bush administration. And they didn't want to play into the Bush administration's hands. Right. And so they went and they did exactly what you're supposed to do in that situation, which is express your views in a peaceful and an appropriate way.
Those of us here in the city, when we look out, was that message communicated to the larger electorate out there, the larger population, the world? I know it's very difficult for us to do that.
You know, it is tough, but it is our responsibility. I mean, that's what to me the only really good reason to have the Republican convention here is because it gives us an opportunity to tell New York's story. And I think the hundreds of thousands of people that turned out as part of that protest, we're helping to tell that story in an appropriate and respectful but purposeful way.
One of the things that I noticed was the absence of elected officials, particularly in this overwhelmingly Democratic city. Why aren't you guys out there doing exactly this?
Well,
or are you guys out there? I'm sorry.
I have been. I mean, I've been working with the DNC, working with a variety of different groups to develop counter-programming to try to tell our story. But look, the reality is at somebody's convention, the press is going to cover the convention. Mm-hmm. They don't cover the counter-response at the same level. And so, I welcomed a busload of average, ordinary Americans with serious problems that aren't being addressed by the Bush administration down at City Hall. Mm-hmm. I went to the veterans protest at Grant Memorial Tomb yesterday. We're doing other protests and press conferences and other kinds of a masquerade ball tonight to point out that what's actually happening here is that the Republican convention has no bearing or reality upon the people who are actually making the decisions in the Republican administration. John McCain, Rudy Giuliani, and Bernie Kerry have nothing to do with the policies of the Bush and Cheney administration.
Why are they there? Monday night, it was New York night.
Well,
what was it?
They're there because the Bush administration has nothing to sell. Their actual record is as abysmal as you can possibly imagine a presidential administration having. President Bush has turned the largest surplus in history into the largest deficit in history. He's lost more jobs than any president since before the Great Depression. He has an environmental record, which is absurd, a social record, which is out of step with not just New York, but with the rest of the country, and a foreign policy record, which clearly our country is less safe today than it was when he took office.
And he's 4.5 points ahead in the polls. Why?
Well,
I mean, that's the Democratic indictment. Why is the president at least tied with Kerry without the convention bounce yet, no matter how small?
Well, it'll be interesting to see what the convention bounce is. I mean, look, I think that when you look at this race, the reality is that people are still looking at it as a referendum on George Bush. They haven't really yet focused fully in on what the alternatives are, because the reality is that people don't pay a lot of attention to elections until the last couple of weeks, or certainly month. And the American public, I think, still hasn't fully tuned into this election. And I think that what you see is that the president continues to show weakness. I mean, the president does not have, a majority. In fact, has never had a majority of the public vote for him. And so I believe that as people continue to focus, as we get past Labor Day and past these conventions, we get an opportunity for President Bush and John Kerry to stand on a stage together and lay out what the issues are and where their concerns are, where they want to take this country, that things will gel very well behind John Kerry.
Okay, let's look at John Kerry for a moment. I mean, the expression out there is you can't beat somebody with nobody. The boxing analogy is you got to score a knockout against the champ, the incumbent. You originally supported, during the presidential primaries, Howard Dean. John Kerry became the nominee. You're supporting John Kerry. I sense among a lot of my Democratic friends, both elected officials and otherwise, this lack of engagement with Kerry, that Kerry has not engaged him either personally or in terms of his message. And there seems to be a lost opportunity. I mean, Mr. Speaker, I mean, it was been like rope-a-dope. George Bush has been taking shots for months, and Kerry has not.
Well, look, George Bush, took a beating for a long time while Kerry wasn't. This is the cycles of campaigns. They build you up, they tear you down. They build you up, they tear you down. You're concerned about where you finish. I don't think John Kerry has to worry at all about motivating his base. His base is motivated, and it was motivated on day one by George Bush. I think it's very hard for those of us who are sitting here in New York City to really make heads or tails of exactly how the campaign is going, because the campaign's not going on here. I mean, the campaign is in the swing states with undecided voters. Now, I actually have a very difficult time imagining why anyone would be undecided in this kind of a race. And truthfully, there are comparatively fewer people that are undecided. Look, you're presented with two candidates with two very, very different opinions about what's the right thing to do on almost anything. And so there aren't that many undecideds, and the campaign is for the undecideds. And since I don't really have a very good picture of what it is that is going to make up an undecided's point of view, since my mind is so completely made up by all of the obvious things that are obvious to me, at least, you know, and I don't live in Ohio, I don't really know how the campaign is going, and I think it's very hard for those of us to. So I can imagine, you know, I think it is frustrating, because what we want to hear, you know, every time George Bush stands up and says anything, my blood pressure goes up. And what I want to hear is somebody, what I want to hear is somebody get up and say, you know what, this is the worst president in the history of our country, you know, and which I think he is. But, you know, I'm not undecided. And so what I want to hear is not necessarily what undecided voters want to hear.
Okay.
And so I think we have to be careful about how it is that we run this campaign, because I don't want to have a good, feel-good campaign and not win. I want to win.
Okay. You just said that Kerry had a very different opinion on things than George Bush, and this campaign has been phrased in terms of different worldviews, culture wars, etc. But if you look closely, for example, at Iraq and Kerry's, to me, a bit confusing positions on Iraq, I don't see very much product differentiation.
Well, I don't think his
Kerry
positions are that. I don't think his
Bush.
positions are that hard to understand. I mean, the senator has taken the position that he thought that Saddam Hussein, and I share it, Saddam Hussein was not only a threat to his people, but a threat to world stability. He's been a threat for quite some time. I don't think there's a lot of debate about that. The senator took the position that he would have supported the resolution in order to give the president the weight, the free hand, to be able to try to bring around world opinion and to move in a consensus way to address the problem of Saddam Hussein, which is what I think was the right thing to do. I think most Democrats feel is the right thing to do. Most actually people in the world felt it's the right thing to do. The problem is that the Bush administration and President Bush took the vote of confidence from the United States Senate and from the American people and squandered it. Now look, I wouldn't have voted. I mean, clearly, I think I wouldn't have voted for the resolution myself if I had known that there was no weapon of mass destruction.
I was going to say, because...
However, I don't think it's an inconsistent position. You said it's hard to understand. I think the senator's position is easy to understand. His position is that Saddam Hussein was a threat, needed to be removed, and he wanted to. The person was our president, and to support our president in a time of international instability, you know, is at least consistent. It's not necessarily my position, but it's consistent. But it's clearly different. Senator Kerry understands that in order to deal with Iraq and in order to deal with the war on terrorism generally, you do not act by yourself. You can't solve the war on terrorism. Apparently, George Bush doesn't feel that he can win it. But you certainly can't win it by yourself. And maybe that's why George Bush realizes that he can't win it, because he can't win it by himself. You have to have allies. You have to develop consensus. And the problem was that while removing Saddam Hussein may have been a worthy goal, it was certainly not the highest priority in terms of the threat to the United States. And what it did was make addressing those other higher priority threats more difficult. And that's why the conduct of the war and the conduct of the peace is so important. And so I think Senator Kerry has a very nuanced and international understanding of international relations, and that's the sort of thing we actually need in the White House, not somebody who doesn't understand how to build coalitions and doesn't understand how to keep the United States respected abroad.
Okay. But it seems to me, just yes or no, has he really differentiated his product from Bush's, clearly, to the American voter, in your mind? I know we're at a disadvantage here, Mr. Speaker,
well, look,
because I'm like you. I haven't seen any of the ads either. The only way you see them is go to Pennsylvania.
But the reality is that the goal at this point is the American voter is not engaged in this election yet. to the extent, or at least
very
the
few
undecided.
undecideds.
But they're not engaged. And no one, look, this is what happens in elections, and everybody needs to take a deep breath. We are in the Republican convention. That's the good part for the Republicans, you know? And so it's okay. Everybody needs to take a deep breath and remember that the election's going to get decided well over 2 months from now, and that people are really going to get down to it, how they're going to vote 2 months from now.
Okay.
This is what happens in elections. You and I, we like to, this is our living, this is our business, we are really focused on it. You in particular, Doug, I don't know anyone who loves this business more than you.
Please.
And so you don't want it, you don't think about it, this is what you think about, this is what you wake up with, this is what you talk to your friends about. Most people are not like that. Okay, so the differentiation in the minds of the American voter, of course it hasn't happened completely, because the American voter isn't paying that much attention, particularly isn't paying that much attention yet to what the alternative vision is that John Kerry has been working out, and isn't going to until we get closer. That's why John Kerry has been spending the time being positive, laying out a different agenda on health care, on jobs, on the economy, on social and civil rights, on foreign policy. He's been laying it out, and it builds a base, and I'm confident that at the end, people will understand the choices, and I have confidence in the American people. They'll make the right decision, just as they did in the year 2000, and unfortunately, Supreme Court substituted its own view.
My Democratic friends remind me of Yankee fans. They're up one day and they're on top of the world, and the next day they lose a game, the Red Sox win one, and it's a disaster. We're never going to get to October. The pitching staff is awful. Do you sense this with Democrats? They've got this up, down, you know, their emotionality is far more extreme than the Republicans. A new psychological theory of the electorate.
Well, you know, I'm a Yankee fan,
Me too.
so I'm happy for the Democrats to be analogized as Yankee fans, because I hope you're right, because the Yankees are going to win.
Okay, let's move off that. Let's go to Mayor Bloomberg's predecessor, Rudy Giuliani. He gave a primetime speech right after John McCain. It was animated. It was Pitbull. It was red meat.
Vintage
It was
Rudy
attack
Giuliani.
dog. How did he play? What was the first of all? Why was Rudy Giuliani there, and what was his message both to the country in terms of Republicans and Bush, but also his message about Rudy Giuliani?
Well, look, I'm not an expert on the Rudy Giuliani watch. Clearly, this is someone who has national aspirations and certainly has a sizable national following. I think he's there because he's popular, because he represents the best that New York had to offer in those days after September 11th. He did a phenomenal job as our mayor right after September 11th and representing the feelings and the concerns of New Yorkers. I think he's gotten off base at this point. To say that George Bush is in the best interests of New Yorkers or even victims of September 11th is, in my opinion, wrong. John Kerry would do a much better job on behalf of the families and on behalf of all Americans. And so I think he's wrong. But look, he's a powerful voice, and that's why he's there.
It was a very sharp speech, and it was almost vintage Rudy. It was gesticulated. I don't think I've ever seen a Republican convention where a speaker spoke with both hands. They must have been shocked in the South to see this Italian boy talking. But he was really into it. But I thought that he threw some really sharp elbows. I mean, Rudy can be dyspeptic, and you know he's known to shove it around.
Yep.
Were you surprised at all with the tenor of it, or this was just Rudy, and this is what you should have expected?
I don't think it's just Rudy. I mean, this is the message. Look, these guys are, you know, they're all on message, and they are going after John Kerry. I mean, the president has his lawyer behind this ridiculous, scurrilous attack on Senator Kerry's war record, which is, I mean, when you think about it, it's really amazing. I mean, this is a president who didn't have the courage to go serve himself in a war, used his own
family
contact in order to make sure that
National
somebody
Guard.
else got sent, not him, to go do his fighting for him. And then when it comes time to actually go and question Senator Kerry's valorous service to this country, again, he doesn't even have the courage to come out and do it himself. He uses somebody else to go off and do the fighting for him. It's outrageous. It's unacceptable. And I think it's starting to come around, and I don't think it's going to serve him well. Because, look, if that's the issue that they want to have the election on, whose war record is stronger, it seems to me a strange choice to choose.
I substantially agree with the analysis, but didn't Kerry ask for it? Aren't you asking for it, the counterattack, the low blow, the savaging, when you make this the centerpiece of your convention? Didn't he say, attack me? Didn't he say, bring it on? And then they brought it on, and now he's whining?
Well, I don't know whether talking about your record and your history is asking somebody to make up outrageous, scurrilous lies to question it. I mean, that's a sad commentary on our country, in which if I get up and say, I have, I've done this, and that's asking for somebody to go out in a concerted and, sort of nefarious way to put together a shady group of people who are going to come up and sell a whole pack of lies, about somebody's service. I mean, I think it's a smart political move, I guess, in a certain sense, although I don't know whether, I guess they're anticipating that people are going to question President Bush's record, which they have, and of which there are a lot of questions. I mean, there's a great big blank spot that nobody can account for, which is not the case of Senator Kerry's record. This is something that was documented and dealt with by the Pentagon at the time. So, it's understandable, but I don't think you're asking for, you're never, by telling the truth, asking for somebody to get up and spread lies.
Fair enough. In our last 30 seconds, what do you see over the next 2 months? Is this going to continue to be just vicious air and ground war, or are we going to see some alternative visions for the future? Or is this just going to be slugfest?
Well, I don't think that President Bush can possibly allow this election, if he can possibly avoid it, to be conducted on the issues. And that's what, so I assume he's going to do everything that he possibly can to get it off it. And Senator Kerry's going to do everything he can to get it back onto it. And that's going to be the struggle. What is this election going to be decided over? If it's going to be decided on the economy, well, George Bush doesn't have a chance. If it's going to be decided on the basis of social or civil rights, George Bush doesn't have a chance. If we actually have a meaningful and reasoned debate or discussion on the subject of foreign policy, George Bush doesn't have a chance. So the only chance that George Bush has is to try to distract, to confuse, to drag down, and to otherwise, ruin the debate. And I assume that's what he's going to do. They're very good at this.
Or John Kerry doesn't define himself and his message sufficiently to the American people.
Well, yeah, but I mean, he's going to give it his best chance. The question is whether or not, whether or not the media and whether or not people are going to recognize the negative and divisive politics of Republican, political strategists for what they are.
Yeah, I think that the debates and some event that we just don't know yet is going to determine the outcome of this election. You're coming back after the election to
wrap
review and wrap it up.
I look forward to it.
Mr. Speaker, thank you.
Thank you, Doug.